Hi everyone. This is a really short material on creating a title in keywords. So following on from a little bit of what I said at the beginning of the first part of the abstract writing videos, is that one of the things that people really find when they find your articles, they find your keywords and your title. And often that's actually how they find your article. The keywords that they type into EBSCOhost or Google Scholar or Sabernet or wherever it is that they're searching are then used by the search engine to match as closely as possible the keywords to the titles of articles. So one idea is to start with your main claim, to start with your contribution to the conversation or your contribution to knowledge, and then to try and encapsulate that. What is the point of your paper? What is your paper trying to do or say? Somehow that needs to be captured in the title so that the title is a reflection of what's in the paper. And the expectation that the title then sets up is met by what the reader then encounters in the paper that you're writing. Consider an online search. What keywords would people be typing in that might lead them to your paper? What might you expect to type into a Google Scholar search or an EBSCOhost search that would return your paper? So you want to try and keep the title to about 20 to 25 words. You don't want an overly long title. Some journals will tell you a specific requirement for the length of titles, but most journals won't. So 20 to 25 words and 4 to 6 keywords is a pretty good guideline to go by. Try to avoid jargon. There are some fields, for example, I have worked with a lot of students in ICT and in computer science where using an acronym in the title is acceptable. This might also be the case for some of the physical sciences like physics, chemistry, and mathematics. In that case, ignore my advice here. Use the acronym if the acronym is accepted in your field and if that is not going to count as jargon. But what I mean here is in your title, try not to use too many of your keywords. You don't want to repeat exactly your keywords in your title, so that if you have, for example, a title that says higher education's contribution to social justice, you don't want to have as keywords higher education and social justice, because you've then taken away 2 extra search terms that you could add. So what I mean is try and avoid repeating words from your title in your keywords. Try and have as many possible search terms as you can, right? So, for example, you might not mention the methodology for your paper in your title because that is not the main contribution to the conversation. So then why don't you try and mention your methodology, particularly, for example, if you've used phenomenology or narrative inquiry, that could become a keyword, because then somebody who's wanting to research how you do a phenomenological study or how you use narrative inquiry could come across your study and then use that as part of their methodological discussion in their own paper or their thesis. Try not to oversell your argument. Don't promise that you've developed an entire theoretical framework for something if what you're really doing is testing out some ideas towards an eventual theoretical framework. Keep it brief, focused, and to the point. You really don't want to kind of overdo it with the title and have this long, wordy, verbose title with big words and keywords and specialist terminology, because generally speaking, that tends to alienate readers. It needs to be quite descriptive. It needs to be very clear from the title what the paper is going to be about, and it needs to point to some extent towards your main contribution. You can also, of course, use a subtitle. This is a really good way of getting more words and more information into the title, and then also making it easier for the reader to digest the title. So this slide really gives you some ideas of different kinds of subtitles that you can use. For example, you can use a subtitle to explain or provide additional context. Linguistic ethnography and the study of welfare institutions as a flow of social practices, the case of residential childcare institutions as paradoxical institutions, if you want to read the whole thing. You could add substance to a literary or provocative or an imaginative title or quote. So this might really count really well for some of you writing in the humanities and some of the social sciences, where this is really going to be something you want to play with. It could qualify the geographic scope of the research. So if you're looking at a particular case, this often counts for people doing studies in political science or geography. Geographic scope can be added. Temporal scope. This is not just for historians. This is for anybody who's doing a particular kind of study on a particular period in time. So you can look at that kind of subtitle. If you, for example, are investigating the ideas or theories of work of a particular individual, this happens a lot in philosophy, political science, some of the more theoretical conceptual disciplines where you might, for example, look at the work of Immanuel Kant or John Rawls or David Hume. So that could be a way of using the subtitle. And then also you can obviously use the subtitle to make a methodological, and I would add probably also a theoretical conceptual contribution. And then I do this at the beginning. I draft a title, I draft some possible keywords I think might be implicated in the paper, and I draft an abstract. And then I work on the paper, introduction, literature review, theoretical framework, and so on. I work in the social sciences, I'm in education and gender studies. So that generally tends to be the structure of my papers. You may be working with a slightly different structure, but the point is the same. I tell myself the story of my paper before I start writing my paper, and I tell myself what it's going to be about. But then at the end, I can come back to that abstract and that title and those keywords, and then I can actually work on revising them. And it makes it a little bit easier for me to stay on track if I've told myself the story of my paper and my argument before I actually then really delve into the meat and bones of actually writing my paper. So you may find this helpful. I hope you will find it helpful. And it can also be a little bit fun. So try and have a little bit of fun now, playing with possible titles for your paper, possible lists of keywords to add to your abstract.